Amy Barnard-Bahn is a former global executive and a consultant to C-suite leaders. She's also the creator of the Promotability Index Self-Assessment and the Promotability Index Guidebook. Today, Amy and I are going to be discussing what it really takes to get ahead. Welcome, Amy. So I'm curious, Amy, what do you think are the key elements of promotability, and which one do people underestimate?
Well, there are 5 key elements, and they're all interrelated. Self-awareness, external awareness, strategic thinking, executive presence, and thought leadership. And they're all important, and especially at different stages in your career and depending on where you are in your career and the culture of your company. But I would say that what I most commonly see, Susan, is that people underestimate external awareness the most. And that's how your behavior impacts others, is the simplest way for me to put it. Um, I'd recently published an article in Harvard Business Review on promotions aren't just about your skills, they're about your relationships. And that's what it really gets down to, is that people often over-index on their technical skills, and they under-index on making those relationships that, as you start to become more and more senior in the organization, are really what makes your or breaks your career. Because at the end of the day, the technical skills are important and you need to do your job well. I think you'd agree. And it's just really a ticket to the game at that point. At that point, to get to the C-suite or board, corporate board, wherever you'd like to go, it's really about your relationships and how you relate to other people, and thinking outside your technical specialty and thinking more broadly.
You know, it's interesting you say that, because I've seen that too with people that I coach.
Yeah.
They get so involved in their technical abilities and they
Yeah.
think that's going to be enough to sell them. But what I'm curious about is, do you think people understand stakeholders and how to identify them?
That's so critical. That's your strategy, right? That's how you move out of being, and that's why strategic thinking is one of the 5 key elements, and that's what starts separating people. They're they're interrelated, but they are in a certain order for a reason, because I think everything starts with self-awareness. Then you build external awareness of, oh, it actually matters what other people think of my reputation and how I'm impacting them, right? It's not all about me. Those are the early stages of awareness in a career, I believe, in my experience. And then the next thing is strategic thinking. Oh, am I thinking strategically about the skills I need for my next position? Am I responding to feedback that I get? Or am I just letting it sit there and rejecting it without understanding that perception is the co-pilot to reality? So if, I can disagree with it all I want, but if that's my perception and it's someone who's a key stakeholder, someone who has power in the organization, that's eventually going to become a ceiling for me.
Yeah.
So I need to think strategically about, well, okay, I think it's unfair. I don't think it's accurate, or it's only based on one interaction with me, but how do I change their perception? And I often work with clients, I bet you do too, on changing perceptions, and re-emphasizing other qualities that may be needed at a particular time, or that really show off your best qualities, because sometimes you're not aware of how that's showing up.
Right, absolutely. So you created the Promotability Index Assessment and the Promotability Index Guidebook. Can you tell the viewers a little bit about them and why you created them?
Sure. Well, I think one of the healthiest things you can do with your career is focus on what you can control. And there's certainly been a lot over the past 20 months or so that we've not been able to control. So I find that can be really dejecting for people, right? So I wanted to create something positive that people could take, and no matter what level of support they have in their organization, and a lot of organizations have adopted this as well, to keep community going and to let employees know that they care about their self-development. So that's been a wonderful thing to say. But I know you'd agree with me that achieving an exceptional career requires advanced planning and investing in yourself, continual investment, and thinking about, what next? What would be fun next for me to learn? What would be helpful? So the Promotability Index Assessment is an 82-question self-assessment that's meant to inspire and evoke thoughtfulness about what are you currently doing versus where do you want to be in the future, and what are some gaps that you might want to work
So
on.
if someone can't invest in a coach like
Mm.
you or me, what can they do to invest in their own self-development?
Well, that's partly why I created the book and the companion, the assessment. The assessment came first, and then people asked for the book. So it just kind of grew out of that. People said, "Oh, well, that's great. I've identified some wonderful things that I want to work on. I've realized, oh, I need to think more strategically, or oh gosh, I should be asking for feedback more so that I'm aware of my external awareness more. But how do I do that?" And so I said, "Oh, okay. Well, I'll write a guidebook that gives you exercises, and then you can do those.
Mhm.
You could pick." There's over 30 exercises. I don't recommend trying them all at once. The whole point is to just pick one or two things to work on. Don't overwhelm yourself. We've got plenty of that going on anyway.
Sure.
Um, and the intent is to be creative and make it fun. Hopefully create better conversations with your boss or other peers. There's a lot in there around, um, you know, how can I approach my boss about this? Sharing the assessment with your boss has been some of the richest conversations people have had that have taken it. And I think close to 2,000 have taken it now, have been when they bring their results to their boss. They say, "Hey, I evaluated myself on this stuff. Would you take a look? And would you give me feedback on, would you assess me the same way?" Boy, is that a great, professional development conversation. And I've heard some beautiful stories about people whose boss said, "You rated yourself you're too hard on yourself on this. You're actually really good at this." And the person's like, "Really? I would have never known that because it never came up in conversation." Um,
Interesting.
yeah. And people who never thought about promotion. Now I had some young women that said they are after taking it, that they thought, "Oh, I just thought I would just, keep doing my thing. But this has kind of made me realize there's a wider world out there. And maybe I do want to keep growing. Maybe it would be boring doing the same thing for the next 30 to 40 years."
Mm,
Um,
interesting.
and then likewise, there've been the opposite. Like someone said, I think I do great on presentation skills. And the boss has been like, "Well, I could support you, but I think you could do better. And if you really want to keep moving forward, you've got to get better at presentation skills." And then they map out part of a development program, on
That's
that.
phenomenal. How can a mentor help in this process?
A mentor is a great person to bring it to as well. Just let's say you don't feel you have a supportive boss, or you just don't feel that level of trust. And unfortunately, we know that happens.
Yes.
Bring it to a mentor and same thing. Say, "Hey, I did this thing." I've had mentors and mentees do that. I've done some mentoring programs, have adopted the book and the format because they wanted to help and they wanted to have a mentoring program, or ESGs, ERGs. They've needed some structure and a tool to use to have those conversations. And so they meet and they mentor each other up and down. Young mentors have said, "Sometimes you come across as really intimidating." And the mentor's like, "Oh, really? I didn't know that." And they're like, "Yeah." So that's helpful managing up, right? And then managing down, they've
Yes.
been like, "Well, sometimes you're not concise. And if you want to, in meetings, I've seen you, not be really concise and get to the point quickly. And if you want to continue to rise in the organization, that's a skill you've got to perfect." So it's easy to use in mentoring as well.
Interesting. A question that I get very frequently, Amy, is how do I find a mentor? What's your recommendation?
Yeah, great question. Um, in an ideal world, mentors are earned, they're not assigned. There are companies that assign them, and that can work, I think, on a limited basis, like literally on a time bound basis with specific outcomes. Because the fact is that a lot of it's based on chemistry, right, Susan? It's just who
Sure.
you feel a calling to support, like a friendship, sort of, but in it for professional purposes, different than a friendship in that it's literally, advice and counsel. So I would say that it's an exploratory process. In olden days, we would have had lots of coffees, I think, or
Right.
water cooler talk, or hanging out with someone at lunch, and that would be a good like
Introduction.
screening
Training.
process to be
Yeah.
like, do I think they like me? Like, would they help me? And you ask, you just
Right.
say, "Hey, would you be willing to do this?" I actually think it's intimidating. I've had people ask me like, "Oh, do you mentor people? Will you mentor me?" And I do mentoring in a few formal programs with young women specifically. And that's a big ask, especially if I've just met someone. I did have someone ask me the very first time I had a call with them. What I wish they had said is, "Would you be open to another call 3 or 6 months from now?"
Mhm.
Giving me some options on the frequency and that. So that's what I would recommend is test out the chemistry, see if you like them. If you think, would you take their advice? Is it someone that you admire and respect and think would help you? And then try to gauge their interest. And you can ask a few questions like that. Like, would you be open to meeting again? I know you're very busy. The other thing that people forget is to be helpful to your mentor. I think another number one way to get a mentor is to find out who you can be helpful to and pay it forward first. People who are not in as senior positions sometimes lack perspective that they actually can help people more senior to them, whether it's volunteering for a project or
Sure.
spreading the word about something, or if you write a lot, you could interview them and write a column on them, or you can really be their supporter when they're not there. And I'm not suggesting that you be transactional in your relationships. I don't personally think that works. In other words, I don't think you should do something with the expectation that you're going to get something back.
I agree.
That's not a great gratitude, and paying it forward practice. But I will say that the more you help people, the more the universe returns things to you. And it's not always a one-to-one relationship. It's not always from the person that you helped. But maybe they know someone else, or it's just that energy you give off that brings really wonderful things.
What's your favorite tip for broaching the subject of a promotion with your manager?
I would say my number one tip is to separate it from the compensation discussion, to keep it a discussion and not a negotiation, and to create a safe space for your manager so they can give you the candid feedback that you ultimately need to get ahead. Because you need to understand how your boss and how the power structure at your company views you as a leader in order to know if you have a shot at promotion in that culture. And so I usually find that the best time to do this is late summer or fall, well before or after the pay cycle and annual performance review has finished, because you want this to be a forward-looking developmental discussion with your boss. And it can go something like, here I am now. How do you see me showing up? Is this what I need to be working on? These are the things I'm thinking of for my self-development plan. What skills or abilities do you see that I should be developing now over the next couple of years to get to the next level? And is that next level possible at this company? What are ways I can demonstrate this? Are there other things I should be getting involved with that you'd sponsor me for, like a cross-functional team where I could, gain other mentors and some other sponsors perhaps outside my area of expertise, which becomes more and more important as you hopefully start heading towards the C-suite, if that's your goal.
How should somebody prepare for a conversation like this?
They should think about their boss's style, how much feedback their boss has been willing to give them in the past, how good a job they've done at asking for the feedback and making it a psychologically safe space for their boss to be honest, because bosses don't want to get into arguments about their perceptions of your performance. If you're going to be argumentative and be defensive, they're not going to give it to you.
What about preparing an understanding of your own accomplishments to be able to discuss those with your boss? Is that necessary?
I think it's helpful. I think you should always be doing that. So you should already have it.
Yes.
I used to do my own mini 360s when I wasn't doing a formal 360, which I also did as an executive. And I would send around a client survey. Again, not during the performance review time, because I knew my boss was going to be doing that during performance review time. So you don't want to inundate, you want to be respectful of people's time. And I would just, if it was in person, that would be ideal. And I would just say, hey, what one thing could I do to be more effective in my job and supporting you?
So when you say a client survey, you were talking about the people that you served inside the company.
Yes, my internal stakeholders, what I call my internal customers.
So what I hear you saying there is that you were totally proactive. No one handed you this survey.
Oh, no.
You were doing this on your own to say, to get some insights into, where you were doing well, how you were perceived, and what you could do differently.
And that is so important for two reasons, Susan, one of which is obvious and one may not be. The first is you get the feedback. And you get it, again, not during a performance review. So they know that your intent is genuinely to get better. and to serve them. Okay. The second reason to do it is it demonstrates leadership and a combination of courage and vulnerability, both of which are skills that are needed in the C-suite in spades. You know, you're showing courage by being willing to take the feedback. Feedback's not easy.
No, it isn't.
And then you're showing vulnerability by listening. The other key point I would make is when you ask that question, the key is to stop talking, to shut up, actually, to put it bluntly, and to just listen. Ask for clarification if you're not clear or an example, but do not argue or judge or debate. The whole point is to get the feedback and just say, thank you so much. That's so helpful. Because if you argue and debate, you will probably never, ever get feedback from them again. And you want to keep getting it. And we already talked about perceptions and how important perceptions are. So even if you think it's wrong or unfair, get the feedback, because if you don't, it's a blind spot.
Right.
And I guarantee you it's better to know, even if it's painful, and it sometimes can be. And so we got to get better at giving and receiving feedback to get better in our jobs. It's one of the things I wish I'd learned earlier in my career. If I were to give anyone, starting out, a piece of advice, is the better you can get at giving and receiving feedback early on, you're going to be way ahead of the game, because you need it to keep learning.
Are there any books that you'd recommend in that area about getting and receiving feedback?
Yeah, I mean, in addition to my own Promotability Index guidebook,
in
addition to mine, which is just helpful in a specific awareness exercise and a bunch of exercises. My favorite book on feedback specifically is Thanks for the Feedback by Sheila Heen, and I'm going to forget. I used to have it on my desk. I moved some stuff into my library, but it's a terrific book. Thanks for the Feedback, and it explains why we hate feedback, why it's hard for us, why we find it threatening and sad and hard and painful and rejecting, and why we need to get over that in order to get better, and all the benefits. So it's a wonderful book that takes a really deep dive, and it also makes you realize you're normal. If you don't like feedback, unless it's positive, of course, everybody likes positive feedback, but the really valuable feedback is the tougher feedback.
Yes.
Right.
Yes.
So this book does a great job of making you realize, oh, okay, I'm normal and not liking bad feedback, whether it's from my coworker or my spouse or my kids. And here's a pathway forward to hijacking my natural impulses of defensiveness in my own best interest.
Great. So, Amy, this has been so incredibly valuable for my viewers. How can people get a hold of you? How can they find you?
Oh, sure. They can come to my website, which is Barnard-Bahn.com, without the hyphen. And also on LinkedIn. I'm happy for people to connect on LinkedIn, and they can get my free Promotability Index assessment, the 82-question leadership self-assessment we talked about, by texting the word "promote me," all one word, to 44222, and it's also on my website.
Okay. And your book is available where?
Yeah, anywhere books are sold. Amazon. It's in 4 different editions. There's paperback, hardback, interactive PDF, and Kindle. And it's at Barnes & Noble, and it's at all independent bookstores as well.
Okay. Fantastic. Well, Amy, I want to thank you so much.
Thanks for having me.
Absolutely.